Hello and welcome to another episode of For Zion's Sake, the CUFI UK podcast. My name is Alex and I'm joined here by Alastair.
Hello.
And this week we're looking at the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC. Its lies and deceptions have been exposed thanks to a new dossier. We're going to be focusing on the anti-Israel aspects of the BBC. And we're going to be asking the question, is this a turning point? Will the British public wake up?
That's right. Plus, we must also make mention of the biblical heritage of the BBC, its foundation, and why it matters. And please also let us know your thoughts about today's topic in the comments section below. So, Alex, we're going to begin with discussing the BBC.
Yep.
And we, of course, have been critics of the BBC for some time now because of its bias against Israel, and we have continually backed that up, proven why that is the case.
Yep.
But it seems as though these issues have come to a head now because the BBC is under the spotlight for, not just the bias against Israel, but other ways in which it has basically tried to push a certain propaganda narrative. And this has come to head because of President Trump's speech, which BBC Panorama doctored heavily in order to smear him. And that, of course, is resulting in President Trump threatening the BBC with legal action of $1 billion. But that same report, the leaked dossier that actually revealed the BBC's actions regarding that speech, also contained a lot of information about the bias against Israel.
Yeah.
So we're going to focus on that part of the dossier.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to say that what they did with President Trump, which made it appear as though he said something insightful that he did not say. I mean, it was a stitch-up, effectively, in every sense of the word, editorially, and also in terms of what they were trying to incite through that bad editing. Deceit, let's call it what it is, right? But that has obviously brought this now into public discussion. A lot of people discussing, well, what is the future of the BBC, which, for the benefit of our international listeners, is, of course, funded by the British public through a licence fee.
Mm-hmm.
So the British public have are invested interest in the way in which the BBC operates. But the BBC is a historic institution. It is an influence, not just here in Britain, but throughout the world.
Yeah. And
this dossier focused very much on BBC Arabic, which is funded by the Foreign Office as well as the UK taxpayer. And BBC Arabic, is the voice of the BBC to the whole Arabic-speaking world. So, what do we make of this? Is this turning point now for the BBC? Is this a turning point for the anti-Israel bias which is being peddled by the BBC?
Well, I hope it will be a wake-up call to a lot of people who see the BBC as almost infallible. There's a lot of, as you said, around the world, the BBC is marked as the most trusted news broadcaster in the world. And in the UK, obviously we all grew up with the BBC. It's almost like part of being British is the BBC. And so I think there is something there where when the BBC says something, people believe it. They take it at their word. And like you said, BBC Arabic has been our main focus in the past because that's where the anti-Semitism has been let loose, really. There's been incidences of, literally anti-Semitic songs, anti-Jewish songs being sung on BBC Arabic where they've had terror supporters and so forth. But now what we're seeing is through, for example, the Panorama incident, that was a British-run like you said, deception. It wasn't just a mistake, because a lot of people are saying, "Oh, this was a mistake."
No.
You know, politicians and the BBC themselves saying that. No, it was not a mistake. You don't. You know, we work in editing videos. We work in reporting on news. You don't mistakenly stitch together two segments, 45 minutes apart, and make it sound completely different to what he actually said.
Well, when
you know, for example,
actually, when you
Trump
work
example.
in video editing, and I'm in a room with those who are much more experienced in video editing, but even in my amateur eye of video editing, can often see where there is a join, and it's quite obvious where there is an editorial join. That particular video was seamless.
Seamless, yes. It was very
really
well
was.
edited.
It was professional. Well, of course it was professional, but it was deliberately professionally done in that particular way.
Yeah.
But
and they even, for example, even within that Panorama show, they actually spliced together. It wasn't just like this segment where he says one thing. They spliced together, for example, the Proud Boys marching in on Capitol Hill an hour before Trump actually spoke, and they tried to suggest that what he said provoked the Proud Boys to do something. Well, actually, the Proud Boys had done their actions before Trump even spoke. So
I think when it comes to these things, right, the BBC is what our expectation of the BBC is to present the facts, to present the truth, to allow people to come to their own conclusions and their own valuations based on truthful information. And you mentioned BBC Arabic, and you said that our focus has mainly been on BBC Arabic. I don't want to disagree with you. I actually think our focus has been very much on the BBC in the United Kingdom and its news coverage, because many people might not actually realise that BBC Arabic is viewed so widely. I mean, obviously, every Arabic-speaking person throughout the world can switch on the BBC. If you're in North Africa or you're in the Middle East, you can switch on to the BBC, and you're not watching the UK news that we're watching at home. You're watching the Arabic language, and that has had just a free reign.
Yeah,
and also Arabic speakers can also watch it here in the United Kingdom using the BBC app. That's very important. Because you have those who are Arabic speaking here in the United Kingdom who are choosing not to watch the BBC UK news, even though we're concerned that is biased, but actually being fed basically Hamas lies, through the license fee payer. Can I just give you some examples of BBC Arabic? So this is in the leaked dossier. So the leaked dossier, accuses basically of the way in which it portrays Israel as the aggressor. The report is saying that Israel were allegations against Israel were raised to air without editorial checks. It's basically just says that there wasn't a due diligence in their reporting. But they also put pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic commentators on air hundreds of times. There's an example of one man who said that Jews should be burned, quote, as Hitler did. And he didn't just appear once. They didn't just think, oh dear, we shouldn't have interviewed him. Wait for it. He appeared as a commentator on BBC Arabic 244 times in 18 months. And there was another individual who described Israelis as less than human. That person appeared 522 times in the same period. So this is not just misfortunate editorial decisions made by the BBC, errors of judgment. No, I'm sorry. This is systematic problems, institutionalized bias against Israel, and that's in BBC Arabic. And some of those journalists as well are, of course, providing information for UK viewers as well.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing. It shows the editorial. Well, it shows BBC Arabic's editorial practices are that it's not adhering to the BBC's guidelines, and I think that is because of institutional bias against Israel. And I think that's not just institutional bias. When you've got people saying that Jews should be burned as Hitler burned them, and Jews are less than human and things. That's anti-Semitic. It's hatred. That is like a lot deeper. And what I was saying before about our main focus has been on BBC Arabic. What I mean is not R as in CUFI,
Okay.
R as in the pro-Israel sphere.
Oh, okay.
Whenever you see, and I probably didn't explain very well,
Sorry.
but whenever you see like Jewish News, Jewish Chronicle, whenever they speak about the BBC's anti-Israel bias, they're mainly highlighting BBC Arabic and clear elements of anti-Semitic hatred, such as these incidents here. But like you said, this now though is not just on BBC Arabic. It's come out into the forefront that it's BBC proper, BBC in the UK. And the Trump example is one example of how this is now in the mainstream BBC. But we personally at CUFI have been saying it for many years now, that the BBC's own channels, I mean, throughout the last 2 and a bit years where the Israel-Gaza conflict has been going on, the BBC repeatedly interviews anti-Semites who maybe they've not said anything on air on the BBC as bad, but in their background they have said very anti-Semitic things. So the BBC still uses those hosts over and over again, treats them much nicer than it does Israeli hosts, guests, I should say. And not only that, but people like Jeremy Bowen has reported misinformation and has done it unapologetically and doesn't seem to care about the truth. And that's the problem we're getting at here. The BBC, the most trusted news broadcaster in the world, doesn't seem to care too much about facts. It doesn't seem to care about the truth. And that is massively problematic.
You mentioned some of the individuals. I mean, you only actually have to look at the Twitter feeds, X. Yeah. To actually have a look at what they're putting on their personal accounts to understand, the worldviews, and this is a sort of a grey area because people say, well, actually, you should be able to express your views, privately, except it's not private. Let's say it's public. But then we have that example of Gary Lineker. He was held to account because he was expressing views not on Match of the Day, although I don't agree with everything he said on Match of the Day either. But he expressed everything, privately but publicly, and that was a conflict of interest, right? Yeah. And so, it is a problem if you have the Gaza correspondent who is there. And by the way, they say that that journalists are not allowed in Gaza. You hear that repeatedly. The BBC literally has a Gaza correspondent.
Yeah, I know.
In Gaza, who is Gazan himself, they're viewing things obviously through the lens of Gazan, which has some, that has value to see things, on the ground level. But you have a look at their Twitter feed, and it is pure anti-Israel, through and through. So actually, it does matter if they are stating things privately, even though it's public, outside of their role with their journalist, vest on.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and that actually goes back to the whole institutionalization of the BBC's bias, because the BBC, I guess it is what happens in these institutions where you recruit like-minded people. And so the BBC for a long time has been more left-wing in its politics, and they are recruiting more people who are like-minded. But that doesn't result in unbiased journalism. Yeah. Because we at CUFA, we are biased. We are a biased organization because we're very pro-Israel, pro the Bible, and we're looking at things through a biblical worldview, through a biblical lens. But the BBC, you hope that they would employ people from different sides of the political spectrum in order to have a more balanced view and balanced reporting. But instead, what we're seeing is it becomes very much like people recruiting like-minded individuals, people who maybe are a bit more outspoken or maybe more right-wing political viewpoints are then being shut down or being basically almost forced out of the BBC. And the same even with guests. They manipulate it so that they get an Israeli on, but they literally put out feeders saying, we're looking for an Israeli who will speak critically against the IDF.
Yes.
So it's not actually an unbiased Israeli opinion.
Yeah, and you make reference there to an actual case.
Yes,
that was actually done.
Yeah, exactly. The BBC were purposely asking for that, and they even approached the Israeli embassy. It was probably some rookie person who at the BBC who did it, because they shouldn't have done it so blatantly.
Yeah.
But they approached the Israeli embassy saying, "We're looking for an Israeli, but we want one who's critical of Netanyahu."
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you're not then getting an unbiased opinion from an Israeli. You're getting whatever the narrative is that you're trying to push.
Yes. And the BBC Director General and the BBC News CEO have both resigned in light of these findings. But it was Deborah Turnus, the BBC News CEO, who several months ago on a what looked like some sort of Zoom call was discussing the Israel Hamas war, and was stressing the point very firmly that there was a difference between Hamas's military wing and their political wing, and it was important that the BBC journalistically makes that distinction. And this is this, and there is no distinction at all.
They are the same thing.
This was, I think, following the BBC's airing of a documentary about Gaza, where the child narrator was the son of a high-ranking Hamas official, and the BBC went very defensive in terms of that. But that shows you something which you could call it bias, but also a complete lack of, I don't know, just
lack of understanding.
Complete lack of understanding. And
because she wasn't saying the truth at all. She was misguided in what she was even talking about. And actually that shows that, even from the top, they were giving Hamas credibility, whereas actually the entirety of Hamas is outlawed. It was an illegal act to even...
So what she was suggesting was actually contrary to British law.
Yes, exactly.
So the BBC, the head of the BBC was giving advice contrary to British law.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's two points I want to make on this, because, we can harp on about the BBC being biased and things, but why actually does it matter? The reason it matters is because it is so influential that the BBC is leading people against Israel. They're leading people astray.
Truth matters.
Truth matters, exactly. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before. We wrote back in September 2024 an article saying the BBC's dangerous anti-Israel bias has been exposed and why it matters. And it's actually talking about a General Sir John Chalmers McColl, who is one of the most senior people within the British Army. Between 2007 and 2011, he was the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. So he was second in command of NATO, one of the highest ranking British officials. And he literally said that based on his view of watching the BBC or watching UK media, he might have watched ITV and other things as well, but he went to Israel as he was invited through NATO to be an observer of the Gaza conflict. And he said he went into Israel with a very, I can quote it here. He said, basing my views about the Israel-Hamas war on UK media coverage, I arrived in Israel critical and skeptical of their military operations. Bearing in mind, he's seen combat himself. He has directed forces, and he was deceived by the BBC. And in the end of his trip to observing the Israel-Gaza conflict back in September 2024, he said, we found that the rules of engagement were being adhered to rigorously, and that a significant number of engagements were being aborted because the clearance of civilians could not be verified. And so he said, what we military observers with decades of combined experience in leading NATO armies were told and saw was the most complex and demanding operational environment any of us had come across, including in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Wow.
So literally, he was being deceived by the media, and he was a leader in military. Just think how easy it is to deceive a civilian who has never had any military experience.
Yes.
And so this is why it's so dangerous what the BBC is doing.
Yes. Also, I mean, many people, and there will be many Christians who do believe what the BBC says, and it's not necessarily that they watch the BBC in pursuit of finding anti-Israel bias. They simply are recipient of the BBC bias, and so that forms those views. You then have another group of people where actually the BBC News, and let's add other news channels as well, some of which are biased against Israel, and they are actually quite happy and welcoming of that bias. Yeah. Because I've seen online personally, looking at some of the threads, where just the very simple fact that if you say, it's important that the BBC is not biased, this particular video with President Trump, doesn't matter to me whether or not you agree with President Trump's policies or not. No news institution should be doctoring a video, splicing it together to make out that something was said that was not said. Exactly. That's just a moral principle. Yeah. And yet, if you have a look at the comments, it's like, well, they're so hoodwinked, they're so determined to want to, basically they're in support of it. They're in support of the deception. Yes, and exactly. So what this BBC bias does is that it reinforces the anti-Semite. Yeah. The anti-Semite is able to point in reference to the news and say, well, the BBC has said this. Yeah. Or exactly. ITV has said this, or Sky News has said that. That's very, very damaging. Yeah. And that's the thing with going back to the Trump thing. I watched a video, and I think it was Richard Madley, or Madeley, how he says his surname. Richard Madley? Richard Madley. He was basically saying, like, when he watched the panorama clip, he didn't even question it, because in his mind, he hates Trump, and he wanted Trump to have said those things because he wanted to blame Trump for those things. Then when he realised what happened, and he was talking to someone who was defending the BBC, saying, well, it doesn't matter if they spliced it together. We should all hate Trump and we should all be against it. That's what and this guy was saying, no, that's not right. Like, and they were having this discussion. They were literally saying exactly what you're saying, because actually a lot of the time with this, the reason why it's not called out is because people want it to be true. Yes. People want to have people they hate and so forth. And it goes back to like conspiracy theories about the Jewish people. It goes back to all these, anti-Semitic doctrines that there are. People want to believe the worst. And so if the BBC is backing it up, they'll happily accept it. Well, Israel's evil anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's true or not. We need to point out that they're evil. Well, so the only people the only people who are going to stand up to it, we can't expect to find some sort of moral flag waving from the anti-Israel brigade. Never, yeah. It has to come from us. Yeah, exactly. We have to speak out. Yeah. And I think that's the thing where, as well, the neutral people who value truth also need to help with this, because we can't just be like a little brigade by ourselves pointing out all of the BBC's flaws. It has to come into the mainstream, which I think is what's happening now. And we have to speak very, very clearly. And it's not just enough to say, well, I don't like the BBC because I don't watch Strictly. So I forget the BBC. Okay, that's a completely separate argument. Yeah. That's, have that discussion separately, whether or not you want to pay your license fee because you like Strictly or not. Okay, let's just accept the fact that, people have a choice to what they do watch and don't watch, and what they prefer and what they don't prefer. But it is interesting because the BBC's license fee, so the covenant with the government and the BBC is coming up for renewal, and the license fee is going to be a very central part of that discussion. And one of the things that with the license fee currently in place, there is, of course, there should be this accountability. I was shocked to hear that the British Foreign Office is actually funding BBC Arabic. I did not know that until this dossier was released. Did you know that? I did not know that. So that means all British taxpayers are actually funding the BBC. Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so literally
in this case, BBC Arabic. But yes, we're all everyone. Hey, hi. We're all funding BBC Arabic.
Yeah. So therefore, me as a non-license fee payer, I
allegedly.
No, proudly. But yeah, all I'm saying is, like, before I say, well, I don't pay my license fee, so maybe I don't have a say. Actually, my taxes are now paying for a BBC service, so I do have a say. So it's one of those things where, and it is so damaging because people's biases are being fed by the BBC's biases, and as well, like, whenever we say the BBC is the most respected news source, we often hear people say, well, I don't trust them. No, loads of people don't trust them. Well, actually, like, we have to look at the statistics and look at the influence and the effect. Like, there are 4-star generals. I don't know if he's a 4-star general, but there are, key generals there who are being led astray when they are the people that should know better than anyone else.
Yes.
So just think how easy it is for a mum sitting at home watching the news who doesn't have any experience in these things to be led astray.
And
so
students,
easy.
in the realm of education, BBC has this,
BBC Bite Size and all that stuff. There's so much where it's being filtered. The BBC is inescapable almost, even as a non-licensed fee payer. There are. I know my kids have to look up things on BBC Bite Size for school, for example, and I normally check it to make sure that things are all okay.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it goes back as well. Like, if you look at the reporting, like Jeremy Bowen, there's an example actually of him where, for example, the Gazan Al Ali Hospital, we debunked this at the time when it happened. We heard the news. Israel has completely destroyed a hospital, 500 people dead, or whatever the lie was that was spread there. And this was like early on in the war, in November 2023.
I think it took you, I messaged you reporting what was on the news. I think within 20 minutes you'd come back with the
debunked
facts.
Debunked the whole thing. And yet, for the next few hours, the next few days even, we heard misinformation going out from the mainstream, and the BBC was notorious for it. Well, they had an emotional person on who was the anchor, who was almost crying as she was saying, 400 Palestinian civilians have been killed by Israel, blatantly saying it when it wasn't true. But worse than that, Jeremy Bowen, who is their Middle East correspondent and the expert, the Middle East editor, he literally said the hospital was totally flattened and was basically going on all these different things. And it turned out that, first of all, it wasn't Israel that did this. It was Palestinian Islamic Jihad. One of their rockets misfired and landed in Israel. And just to point out to the audience, at least 10%, more likely 20% of all rockets fired from Gaza land inside Gaza and kill people. So, bear that in mind when you listen to the statistics. But anyway, the reality was, it was an Islamic Jihad rocket. It hit the car park. It killed, they think, around 70 people, so it wasn't 400. And it was categorically not Israel. Jeremy Bowen was interviewed after that, and they like, this was a long time later, maybe a few months later, and he was asked specifically, do you regret anything about that misinformation? And he said, and I quote, "I don't regret one thing in my reporting because I was measured throughout. I didn't race to judgment." And then the interviewer says to him, "You said the building had been flattened." And he goes, "Oh yeah, well, I got that wrong because I was looking at the pictures and what I could see was a square and that appeared to be flaming on all sides. And there was, sort of a void in the middle. And so I was looking at the pictures. I think it was from a drone. So, we were trying to have to piece together what we see. And I thought, well, that looks like the whole building's gone. And that was my conclusion from looking at the pictures. And I was wrong on that. But I don't feel particularly bad about that. And it's like, so literally, I'm obviously not saying exactly how he would have said it because I don't know.
Good impersonation.
But the thing is, basically, this news, we still have people who have mentioned 400 people killed in the hospital strike. There's still people who think that Israel bombed a hospital and killed hundreds of people because of the BBC, primarily the BBC's misinformation, but also Al Jazeera and other news sources as well, who completely said the false information. But Jeremy Bowen there doesn't regret it at all.
No,
and
no
that's
remorse.
the problem. No remorse.
I think that's what came through this leaked dossier.
Yeah.
Was that there was no effort to correct. There was no effort to apologize. You couldn't call it a cover-up. That's literally what it is. Like if media integrity. If you make a mistake, then admit it.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I just making one reference. The Camera, which is an organization that reports bias in the media, they submitted hundreds of complaints about BBC Arabic's coverage in the past 2 years, and BBC Arabic was forced to make 213 corrections to stories that were deemed biased, inaccurate, or misleading. But many others were completely rejected, and apparently none of the appeals were accepted. So there is this, there is obviously there's a admission there in having to make the correction that they were wrong. But it didn't seem to make any change culturally.
No,
in their coverage.
No, exactly. And Camera, by the way, is a great organisation. We've worked with them. You've done some interviews and things with them before in the past, haven't you? So, they're a great source to go to look at the misinformation, because we're not dealing with it day to day, day in, day out. They are literally analysing the news and finding the faults that come up. But yes, that shows, and it sort of goes back to what Jeremy Bowen's saying. The reason he doesn't regret it is because actually he still wants to paint the picture that Israel's bad. The reason they change those those things to correct them, okay, that clear and obvious areas will change them, but the overall narrative will keep the same.
Yes.
That kind of thing. The problem is, though, is even with those changes that they made, the initial story's already gone out. In the news is fast moving.
Yes.
It disappears after a day, sort of thing. So once the news has gone out, 99% of people that are going to read that article, or maybe 95% who are going to read the article, read it within the first day. When they correct it after the first day. It takes weeks to correct it. So the damage is already done. The misinformation's already out there. It's the same when they've got headlines. They put a false headline out there, the damage is done, because people won't read the details of the article. They'll read the headline and then don't read the article. They'll base their opinion on the headline alone. Yes. And so the problem we have when we're dealing with the news is it is very fleeting. And if it's not the correct news in the immediate, then most people will believe that. And it's like the old saying, a lie gets around the world before the truth has its pants on. It's very much, lies spread like wildfire. The truth is a slow moving thing. And so the BBC knows what they're doing. We've been exposing it for years, but now, thankfully, it's coming to the mainstream, and hopefully it will be even more exposed.
Yes. Well, let's hope. I mean, I'm hoping that there is reform in the BBC and in BBC News, but I think probably more so, and maybe even more importantly, actually, than the BBC itself and its future, because and that is that people are more aware and question what they are seeing on their box in the corner of the room, or on their phones. Question it, and just not to believe everything that these biased media channels are saying. And hopefully, what we have been saying for many years now about BBC bias is not just us expressing a disagreement with what is being said, but people can literally see, right, actually, the BBC is anti-Israel. Its coverage is anti-Israel. And I think, you mentioned about from the top. I think it's okay. I mean, we say about it being from the top down. It's fine in terms of, these high-profile resignations taking place, but I actually think there has to be reform on the junior desks of the BBC. Yeah. Right to the very bottom, because I think there is a connection between those who are entering the world of journalism from what is very left-wing universities where anti-Israel bias might be part and parcel of the education, perhaps, then going into institutions like the BBC. So there needs to be better editorial standards, more robust standards in that regards. And as you say, it's fine, if the Director General chooses to resign, but actually there has to be a cultural change in that institution.
Yeah, definitely.
Talking about the institution, we were talking earlier, were we not, about the biblical basis, the biblical foundation that the BBC was founded upon.
Yeah.
And that's something what makes the BBC unique. I mean, it's not, I don't look at the BBC as some sort of sacred cow which is untouchable.
Yeah.
But I do hold a great deal of admiration for the heritage of the BBC, the biblical heritage, and that is something that has been lost, and that is, I think, has been a detriment to this nation.
Yeah.
And just to give you an example, the founders of the BBC laid a stone, which is on the entranceway in Broadcasting House in London, in the foyer, inscribed in stone, is this. And it's in Latin, but I'm not going to read the Latin. I'm going to read the English. This is what it states. This temple of the arts and muses is dedicated to Almighty God by the first governors of broadcasting in the year 1931, Sir John Reith being Director General. It is their prayer that good seed sown may bring forth a good harvest, that all things hostile to peace or purity may be banished from this house, and that the people, inclining their ear to whatsoever things are beautiful and honest and of good report, may tread the path of wisdom and uprightness. And that is there to this day. But sadly, it hasn't been upheld.
Exactly. Yeah, and just to point out, there's the original inscription was from 1930. It was in the building 1932, which is in stone, but they put it in the new building as well. The same thing. But like you said, it's in Latin. We were joking before the podcast that that's the problem. It's in Latin, and most journalists don't speak Latin anymore.
And they didn't have subtitles back then, did they? So,
yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, that's the thing. And this is the thing. Dedicated to Almighty God. It's dedicated to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel. And it says here, whatsoever things are beautiful and honest and of good report. That's going on Scripture. That. So it's clear that these were Christian men and women who founded this institution, who wanted God to be at the center. Every time they walk in the building, they see the inscription and they think of their commission that they have, to serve God and honor God. And now we look at what has become of the BBC. And even, for example, with BBC Arabic, they've branched out into the whole world, but they've not taken the Christian message into the whole world. No. They're trying to take... You see what I'm saying? They're trying to take a secular sort of worldview out there, and that's why it's being infected by things of ill repute, things that are not of good report, things that are not beautiful.
It's interesting that it was actually their prayer. Yeah. It says it is their prayer that good seed sown may bring forth a good harvest. It was their ambition. It was their dream that this would be something which was glorifying God and was fruitful for the kingdom. And, it says here also, that anything which is hostile to peace or purity may be banished from this house. They did not, they would not have wanted what is currently happening in the BBC to have even existed, to have even have been a carrier of it, a promoter of it. And, we have a decision to make whether or not we want these sort of lies and dishonesty in our house. And as Christians and as supporters of Israel, I think we've already concluded that we don't want anything to do with this. But our heart and concern is about the world which is exposed to it. Yeah. And how can we have any kind of moral standard if it is not defined by the Bible? Because the Bible is the source of truth. It's not just the source of truth, it's the source of wisdom as well. Yeah.
And morality. We get our morality from the Bible.
But if we are to make wise assessments, then actually the Bible is the framework. It is the foundation.
Yeah.
And they laid a foundation which is right, from now on, we're going to make a decision. It says we may tread the path of wisdom and uprightness.
Yeah.
And sadly, that has been neglected. And the only way that we are to properly decipher what is true and which is false, which is lies, what is honest, what is deceit, is by actually having a clear understanding of what God says about the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what it largely comes down to.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And I think you said something interesting about the banishing it from our house, because going back to last week's podcast, we're talking about Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, and obviously there's other big name people who are, they proclaim Christianity, but they're not honoring God in this sort of area. And I think we do have to be careful that we don't accept or align with the things that are not of God. And I think that's one thing where the BBC has gone astray. Like if they were going to stack the BBC in one area, they should have stacked it with Christians. They should have stacked it with people who were honoring that, foundational sort of pledge that they had there. Because, like you said, without the Bible, we cannot have moral clarity. And yeah, so it goes back to that thing. We need to make sure we, as Christians, don't entertain anti-Semitism. We don't entertain Christians who are undermining God, because it undermines the very foundations of the Bible. And it's the same with the BBC. They are not a biblical organization. Even though the founders had that biblical mandate and they believed it fully, unfortunately, it is a man-made entity that is having its foundations eroded away.
And don't get me wrong, I don't think that the BBC is anytime soon going to transform into God TV or Revelation TV or TBN or any of the other Christian broadcasters. Yeah. I don't think we should expect that. But I almost think this is the battleground. Yeah. I actually think it's the foundation which was laid, which they had this vision that it would be honouring to God, which is actually why there is such an attack by the enemy in order to try and strip it of its sort of role of portraying truth.
Exactly.
It's flipped it around.
Yeah. And the BBC actually is just a microcosm of the bigger picture, which I think goes to, for example, the West. The West was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, Judeo-Christian heritage. And again, the West is under attack more than any other, well, apart from Israel, under attack more than any other group in terms of the sort of globalist agenda to try and wipe out Christianity from the roots of the West. So I think all of it is, it's all a good versus evil fight. Israel is a good versus evil battle. Yeah. Standing with Israel is standing on the side of God. Yeah. It's the same with the BBC. It's a God versus Satan, good versus evil thing. And I know it may sound extreme to say that, but in all honesty, all of these battles are good versus evil, God versus Satan. And every single time, the things which were founded upon biblical principles are being undermined and attacked more than all the other things combined. Yes. Because Satan doesn't have to conquer something he's already conquered, right? Yeah. But he has to conquer something which, was founded by God.
So this is an area for prayer, really.
Yeah.
Because we can see that is under my... I'm pleased that this has been exposed.
Definitely.
But we need to pray into it that actually this will be... that there will be good from this, that people will perhaps tune in less to the BBC in its current state and tune into CUFI UK and our weekly news review, which comes out every Friday evening. But really just to pursue wisdom, to seek wisdom.
Yep.
You pray for wisdom, God gives wisdom.
Yep.
And may he be glorified. It's perhaps a nice transition just to mention about Torch, because you mentioned about the foundations, which are under attack in terms of sort of these pillars, institutions which are in the United Kingdom, which were founded upon biblical principles. And one of our articles in the latest Torch magazine is actually standing with Israel is an integral part of Britain's Christian values. And yes, this nation, the United Kingdom, has been founded, has been built with on Christian values, on Judeo-Christian values. And the word Judeo-Christian has come under attack recently from various angles, but we are holding on to it quite firmly because it is very much part of our national fabric. Our laws were based upon biblical laws. Our leaders in our nations, our forefathers, recognized that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so everything from the Ten Commandments have been part and parcel of really how this nation was built. And so this article looks at the Christian heritage of the United Kingdom and how that relates to how now our nation should stand with Israel and the Jewish people. The fact that Israel is a moral test. The Bible says about, I will bless those that bless you, I will curse those that curse you. And we understand and we should learn from history about the fate of nations, tribes, peoples that turn against Israel and mistreat the Jewish people. And so God will hold this nation to account for the way in which it treats Israel and the Jewish people. And the Bible is the foundation, and the Bible, which is the foundation for our laws, foundation for the cultural heritage that has developed here in the United Kingdom, is actually also confirms historical fact, the very fact that the nation of Israel can be proven by the Bible and is supported by the historical fact that there's been the Jewish presence in the Holy Land for over 3,000 years, and the land of Israel is the land of the Bible. So all of these things, there's such a lot to go into this. But I encourage you to request this magazine, and you can read this article and many other articles which will encourage you, inspire you in your stand with Israel and the Jewish people. Torch is available for free. If you live in the United Kingdom, it is free to receive by post, and everyone is able to receive it for free online. All you need to do is to go to www.cufi.org.uk/torch, where you can see the latest Torch magazine, subscribe for free, and become equipped. And maybe you'd like to pass on one of these magazines to one of your BBC watching friends. Wouldn't that be a good idea? Because we have to counter these lies with the truth. It's all right, Alex and I sitting here complaining about the BBC. We do that every day. I mean, we do other work as well. But we have to take some action. And the way in which we take action is by speaking the truth.
And that's the thing. This is all about equipping people. The reason we make the Torch is so that people are equipped with the truth. And this Torch magazine, or not this one in particular, but we've had people say, they picked up a Torch magazine in their dentist office or wherever, and they read the truth and have connected in with us. And so we do know it's a tool that helps to educate people. It helps to embolden those who are already pro-Israel, but it also helps to challenge those who are anti-Israel as well. So it's a great tool. And to say no, the reason it is free is because it is funded by the supporters of CUFI UK. And as you'll see here, Alastair has a lovely pin badge on, which will show up on the screen as well. But we have that exclusive to partners of CUFI UK. So if you want to become a partner, it's anyone who gives a monthly donation of any amount. And so if you make that regular donation, you can become a partner. You'll receive the pin badge. You'll receive some other useful tools to equip you, such as books written by Pastor John Hagee. And that will help you in your walk, help you in your advocacy for Israel. And we just invite you to join us in this, because it's through the giving of our partners that the podcast is possible, the Torch is possible, the fact we can go around the country speaking to people and do many other things, blessing the Jewish community, for example. All of it is through the giving of our partners. So we just want to thank every single one of you who does partner with us. And if you'd like to become a partner yourself, then please go to www.cufi.org.uk/partnership or /donate. Both of them will allow you to become a partner that way. Do get involved, get your Torch magazine, and if you do feel led, please do become a partner.
Absolutely, and the links will be in the description below.
Yep.
Please also let us know your thoughts about the topic we've discussed today.
Yep.
In the comment section below, we'd love to hear your thoughts. But for now, I think that's all we have time for.
Yep.
Alex needs to go and continue his legal action against the BBC for $2 billion. But until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Bye-bye.